start. Hello. Just because we want to keep you guys on time and make sure we end on time. And we kind of have a lot of different things planned, and so we're just going to kind of see. We'll share, and then we're kind of just talking back and forth. Like we have a lot of options, so if like people are curious, we could show some things that we talk about. If not, and it seems like it's more beneficial to break out into like K2, 3, 5, and actually start like planning and talking about how we might plan for mini lessons. We'll do that. So please just keep us posted throughout if you have questions or suggestions on what would be helpful to you. So hopefully this next hour is helpful. If you weren't at the first session, my name is Whitney Roth. I teach second grade at Marcy Elementary and have been a teacher in the district for eight years, I think.
Callie Lauer, 5th grade at Marcy, and 6 years? Lovely. 6 years in the district.
So again, we're back sharing again. It was really fun to be able to share a month ago or a couple weeks ago just a tiny bit about what we learned at the Teachers College for Reading and Writing in New York City this summer at their Reading Institute. And last session was on reading workshop as a whole. So now our hope is that if you were there or if you weren't there, we're now going to take each little component of the reading workshop block and break it down and hopefully give some tips and talk a little bit about the planning and what goes into each of those blocks.
Yep. So we kind of started just with the first slide, stop and think, and we originally said stop and jot. We'll talk about stop and jots later because it is part of what you could do with your students during Reader's Workshop. But we just noticed from the exit slips from the last session that there were a lot of questions kind of surrounding this essential and how do you determine what skills and strategies you're going to teach in reading. And so both Whitney and I talked about that initial question. We talked with reading specialists about it. We talked with Mrs. Trewicki, Michelle Trewicki about it. And I think we all came up with kind of a similar consensus as to how we determine what is taught. And so,
yeah, at the same time also like knowing there's not one really right or wrong answer. So we thought maybe it's helpful if we shared a little bit about like what we do when we plan our reading units and lessons and the resources that we use. But also please know this is again just sharing, so it's not the way or the only way to plan lessons. And there are so many different ways, but there were just some questions about like where do you get your ideas for these mini lessons? Where are they coming from? How do you plan exactly? How do you plan what you're going to teach in reading? So really, we kind of boil it down to 3 things. And we used to teach 5th grade together. So some of this is also coming from when we both taught the same grade level, and we would plan a little bit of reading together. But the first thing, I think the most important thing is that you have to really know your standards. So now I'm back in 2nd grade. My binder of the 2nd grade literacy standards is, I have a pen all over the standards. They're highlighted, they're starred. I write down days that I hit each standard or the unit or the resource that I'm using to make sure that that standard is covered. So whatever grade level you're in, I think the first, like one of the most important things is knowing what the standards are at that grade level.
and something that I just do, and it's similar to Whitney, we have the Common Core, it's not Common Core B, Common Core Link, ELA,
Yep.
the book that has like the reading, the writing, the listening, speaking. So I have that as well, and then I've just found that I found this cheat sheet and just reformatted it, that I have everything for reading just on here. And so when I like plan lessons or I'm trying to choose like what strategies I'm going to teach, I'll look at what I haven't like hit yet as far as the standards that are required, and then I'll kind of look at the notes like to see where I hit other ones, and if it was just like for listening and speaking, if it was only through book clubs, then I'm going to find another way to incorporate that standard into something else I'm doing. So that's, I think we both use that at some level.
Yeah. So I think standards was 1. 2, we talked about then get to know the standards, and then 2, get to know resources that are available to you. So definitely, first of all, we have benchmark literacy, and that can be used to guide your planning, absolutely, and that can be used for lessons. It's a wonderful resource, and the strategies and the scope and sequence that are provided by benchmark literacy are nice to take you through all the way the school year. So it's a resource, and there are more resources that are available to us through our district. So some of the resources that we came up with that we have used are the Reading Strategies book by Jen Saravallo, the Strategies That Work book. We did get a few copies. We're trying some of the lessons from the units of study this summer from New York. But again, it's not the only resource. We're not teaching day by day. It's just another piece to our planning. There have been some beginning of the year lessons that have come from the Book Whisperer by Donalyn Miller, Reading in the Wild, things that foster really positive reading behaviors. Do you want to look at Eileen Beer's one?
Yes, so the reading nonfiction Notice and Note, there's 2 books to that set. There's a nonfiction and a fiction. I was lucky enough to take the nonfiction class with Pamela Alter last year. And so I started my school year after I taught different reading habits. I went right into the nonfiction strategies, and that was 3 weeks of nonfiction instruction following the mini lesson structure that we'll talk about. But I will tell you, if you're not familiar with it, I honestly don't think it matters what grade you teach. It truly transformed my students in ways that let them talk about nonfiction text, whether it's magazine articles, short books, in a way that they've never talked about it before. Scope magazine, the higher level Scholastic News, we use that, and so that text alone has changed the way I teach nonfiction. And there is a fiction version I have not read yet. That'll be on my list.
So I think after we do the standards and then we look at like all the different resources available, then we maybe picked like a strategy and then decided, okay, how can we pull from this? What can we take from this? What can we take from this? And then we decided what mentor text we were going to use. But before you switch it, the last thing that I really want to emphasize too is we've got standards, we've got resources, but the other thing that you like really have to pay attention to are your kids and what your kids need. So I don't want to let that one slide because I think sometimes, and I even catch myself getting stuck in a program or like, okay, I did this lesson this day, so now I have to do this one this day, regardless of if my kids need it or not. And just this week I was reminded of that. Like, I was trying some more of the lessons from a nonfiction unit of study in the Lucy Calkins book, and every day that we started reading, like, my kids were groaning when we started the mini lesson, and I couldn't figure out why, and I just started thinking back to what the lessons were focused on, and then did my kids really need that, or were they doing the behaviors that I was teaching? And once I thought about that for a second, it was like a no-brainer. I didn't need to keep reinforcing the same concept because so many of them got it. So I think consider like your conferences with kids and your small groups. What do your kids show you that they know during their conferences? What do they show you that they don't know yet, that they don't know how to do, that they need support with? We talked a lot at the beginning of the year about like reading behaviors. When you sometimes just like stand back and watch your class read, and what are they doing? Are they using Post-it notes? Are they distracted? Like, you could have a mini lesson on how to use a Post-it note to track your thinking, or a mini lesson on like staying in one spot and not getting up to run personal errands. Like,
And I had to do that last week. I thought I had it all done, and we had to go back to reading habits and how students were not moving from the mini lesson to independent reading time, and it was taking like 7 to 10 minutes, and I'm like, this is not going to work. So I went back and taught a lesson I didn't think I had to. A comprehension one, we've been working on the complexity of characters in the nonfiction, or in the fiction books that we're reading, and my students have picked up on a lot of it, but I found that I had to go back to a lesson I taught 2 weeks ago because they still don't understand that characters are going to change and develop as you continue to read, and they're not reading anticipating that change happening. So I literally honed in on one part of my lesson, and that's what they're going to do for the next 2 days because they're still confused.
mine, in the last couple days when I've been doing individual reading conferences, and I start with, can you tell me what the book is about? Honestly, like 2 minutes later, the child is still talking, like, and then she did this, and then the mom did this, and then this. So today I did the retell, like how do you do a retell for a fiction story and a nonfiction story. So it didn't, I think I pulled some of it from the strategies that work, and then, the reading strategies book, and then I pulled a little bit of it from the strategies that work on how to retell, how to summarize. So merging them together. So standards, resources, kids. There's not really a right or wrong answer, I don't think, but you have to use multiple resources to make it effective. I think if you get stuck with one program one way, it's not going to be fun for you, and it's not going to be effective for the readers in your classroom. So all of these are tools you can use, and I think the main thing we were talking about is that if you want to, plan something that's really worth it for your kids, it is going to take time and it's going to get a little bit messy, but it is possible. So we just had an example of something that we did when we were both teaching 5th grade, using multiple resources and sort of picking a focus and picking a genre and then picking strategies that we were going to teach within that genre, picking our own mentor texts, and then picking our own resources and lessons.
And I have to say, when we did this, starting this off, we did look right at benchmark literacy, and we went through the different units and we picked the strategies that we were going to teach from benchmark, and then from there we chose the lessons that we thought were applicable from benchmark, and then we went to other resources. So that kind of started, at least we did, that's what formed how we were going to choose what we were being teaching.
So we just kind of had it broken up into different days. The first day was introductory. We wanted kids to keep notes during this unit, so we showed them how to take notes. The second day we wanted to talk about visualizing in nonfiction. We used the Mentor Text Extreme Earth Records by Seymour Simon. We did an anchor chart the next day. There's a Scholastic News main idea activity. The fourth day we did summarizing. So we had a couple lessons, anchor charts, and things we pulled from other resources. We did a little short video on Pixar to talk about cause and effect, because that was another strategy that we wanted to teach. And then we incorporated benchmark, Unit 6, Week 1, Day 2, or whatever that lesson was, because it had something to do with cause and effect. So there's a conglomeration of benchmark, Scholastic News, strategies that work, anchor charts that we found online that we wanted to just build with our kids and teach at the same time. I can't think of getting anything, but
yeah, and like Whitney came in today, so just, when we did that though, our mini lessons weren't really mini, and they weren't.
Yeah.
But that was pre us learning that they needed to be mini. So some of the stuff on there when we plan, it would say day 1, day 2. Sometimes one of those days would take 2 days to go through the material.
So before we move on to mini lesson pieces, are there any lingering thoughts or questions just on resources and planning? It's not a clear-cut really answer, but it's not clear-cut planning either.
It is not, and I have to just say one thing. I know a lot of people are like, "Whoa, how much time do you spend doing this?" And it's got to take I have 4 kids. If I can do it, I think anybody can do it. And I said to Whitney, we're all planning. Every one of us is taking time to plan what you're doing in reading, what you're doing in writing, what you're doing in social studies, science, word study. If we think about all the subjects. So what we found is that the way that we had planned when we planned together was, it was a lot up front, and we'd spend a lot of lunch hours with all of our resources spread out on the tables. But once it was set, we'd be set for 2 or 3 weeks with the reading, and then making modifications and changes as we go. And I think even the way I plan my reading now, which is different than that, it's a lot, but we're all planning. So I'm quite certain that I feel like my instruction has been simplified.
Yeah, and I think it's easier if you have a focus. So if you pick a strategy and then gather some mentor texts and then start thinking about the standards. So all of those are kind of at the top, and then you can start using different resources to fill in. If it's making inferences, we want to use fiction, or you could do fiction and nonfiction. Finding standards that match, finding mentor texts that you want to use those resources to find different examples of lessons that maybe go with that, and then sort of come up with a plan. And then it's set. It takes a lot of work up front, but then it's...
Yeah. So under the components of balanced literacy, and we continue to show this slide just so that everybody knows kind of where our focus is at. We will be talking about read aloud at one of our next sessions, so we're not focusing on that today, and really just highlighting, noticing that it is totally separate from workshop. And so again, we'll come back to that at another time. But reading workshop is what we're going to focus on today, and that is where your mini lesson is going to take place. So if you look at the pie up in the upper right-hand corner, that is the section that we're going to focus on just today.
And this is a small section, as you can see. If you remember from last time, this is a little, try for about 10 minutes of really teacher sort of led or directed teaching and instruction, and then the majority of the time is independent reading and practice, and then ending with a share. So today our focus is just on that really tiny piece of the pie and how we plan for that.
And I do think this is where we both agreed we had our biggest ahas.
This summer.
And yeah. So smallest part, most learning probably. So what is a mini lesson? It is truly meant to provide the learners with strategies that they can use that day in their reading and every day that they go forward in reading. I know I keep telling my students in class too, for some reason they differentiate what they're doing in the classroom from what they're doing at home. And it continues to happen. They're like, but I don't have to do this at home, do I? And I'm like, yes. But you might not be writing it on a Post-it note, but I want you to be thinking about it as you're reading. So really getting the kids to realize that you want that transfer of knowledge. What we're doing in the classroom should be what you're doing at home, or if you're at the library reading a book, you're doing it there too. Just the act of thinking. And it truly is about approximation, not mastery, and it is mini. And I kind of sort of compare it a little bit to everyday math, because I feel like with everyday math, it's that spiral effect where, you know, you're teaching them a little bit and you're not expecting mastery the first time, or maybe the second or the third time, but eventually you're expecting that mastery. In the mini lesson, you're just trying to give them a small bit of information in a small period of time, and your feedback to the students on how they're doing will come more in the other parts of the reading workshop.
I like to think about it as this, like Callie kind of said, it's meant to equip learners with a strategy they can use not just that day, but every single time that they read, whether at home or at school. So I kind of like to think about it in terms of like, I coach, so I like start thinking about when I coach practice, and then when I coach during a scrimmage. So if you I have a player actually that's here today, Sylvie, second place this weekend. It's a great tournament. If we're at practice and I want to work on a skill, say passing or setting, we're going to do a drill that's maybe just focused on that skill. So in this picture, there's where kids are getting their hands ready and they're just learning how to set in isolation. So that's important that we take that time to just teach that skill in isolation so they can really focus on it and see it and learn it and do it and just focus on that one thing. But if I never put the kids in like a game-like situation, like a scrimmage where they have to set while all these other things are going on, then they're never going to transfer that skill to the actual game when it's them. So like their independent reading time. So I kind of think of as the mini lesson, that quick little 10-minute piece of the reading workshop, as the practice. And then the read aloud, which we'll explore at a later time, but independent reading, all of that's the scrimmage where they're using that skill, but they also have to balance it with all different other types of thinking and thoughts and questions. So to put it a little bit more in perspective with reading, the mini lesson is kind of like the practice, okay, where we're just isolating a specific skill. So something like this, how to make an inference. So if that's my focus for my mini lesson, I'm going to be very direct and very explicit. Teach, model, help kids in 10 minutes or less, tell them how to make an inference and just focus on that strategy. But then when they're reading, that's me actually with the red hair. They're doing all of these things. They're making inferences, but their mind is probably noticing facts that they are reading for the first time. Maybe there's tricky words that they need help decoding. Maybe they're asking questions. They're using their background knowledge. So they're doing all of these things, and they're also inferring. So if we don't do both, and we don't give them that time, like the game time to practice both, if we don't do anything, then the transfer doesn't happen. So kind of like what Callie was saying, where kids are going to say, well, this is what I do at school, but I don't do this at home. So it's important to give kids just a really quick little focused, isolated practice, the mini lesson, but then keep in mind the big picture is when we're conferring with them and talking with them during independent reading time and using our read aloud.
On your tables, we handed two sheets out to you. You can look at these now, reference them later, but we'll kind of talk about all of the components quickly. One of the sheets is blank back to back. This is just the format. One side is the one that Whitney uses to planners, the other one is mine. They look almost identical, but that's kind of what we plan our lessons on. The other sheet, the other sheet follows the architecture, but then there's just some notes that kind of explain each of the components of a mini lesson with some prompts that you could use on one side and then the explanation on the other. So one of the things that, and I'm looking at trying to put together the vote. So this framework was taught at the Institute, and it's kind of based on Lucy Calkins' framework for units of study. However, last night, as I'm reading articles online, I found two other people that follow the identical pattern. They just have different names for a few of the components. So this I've seen on multiple reading expert sites as a form to follow for Readers Workshop.
Yeah, I think it's just a framework, and when we learned about it this summer, we didn't have the units of study, but I was already thinking like, okay, how could I make this work for all the other resources that I have? Because the framework and the timing and the pacing of it, to me, I don't know, it just really made sense. The basic format is truly I do, we do, you do, and it happens within a time frame of about 10 minutes. So the gradual release of responsibility is quick and it's focused. And I don't know, it seems to be really effective no matter what resource that you're using. I've planned a couple different lessons, or most of my lessons, using just that overall framework to talk about each part.
And I have to say, I do think the experts in teaching mini lessons are probably K-4 and kindergarten teachers, because you don't have I could not teach that grade long. You don't have their attention very long. So I truly think that the younger primary grade teachers are probably more experts on how to keep things simple, direct, and right to the point. However, now having done this, I'm like, maybe I could teach a short lesson to kindergarten or first graders.
So there's a couple different components, and in the at the Teachers College, they broke down, so this whole entire thing, connection, teaching point, your teaching, active engagement, link, all of these pieces, total of 10 minutes for each, for the entire mini lesson. So they broke it down even into like smaller increments. So the connection is the first part, and that's about a minute, if you want to get really technical. So the purpose of the connection is to start your mini lesson in a kind of engaging way. You're trying to get your community of readers to really come together, connect ideas from previous lessons, possibly connect ideas from the real world and from at-home reading. Connection can start with a question. You can start by sharing something that you read or something that's been on your mind related to reading. It's kind of like the hook. So just a real quick 1-minute question prompt, something to get the readers engaged and starting to think about what they're going to learn that day in the mini lesson.
My connection today happened to be, we went and saw the play, The Giver, and it worked perfectly for the complexity of characters, and so I was able to tie it right into the play, and the kids knew the actors and actresses, and they were able to make that quick connection. Something that I think we both have read about too is you don't want to fake the connection either, because the kids will eventually start picking up if you're like, so last night I was thinking about you as readers and around the fire and I was thinking about the books you're and they're not going to buy into it eventually. So I just feel like Whitney said, the more specific, name your, get the connection to them and try to make it as real as possible.
Yeah. And after that, I think I would add keep that one short and quick, build anticipation, and then the teaching point is the next thing. And the teaching point is basically just like one quick sentence where you're very explicit with the kids and you're sharing with them, today I'm going to teach you, or today we're going to learn, and then whatever the strategy is. Today we're going to learn that nonfiction readers use features on a page in order to understand the information they're reading. Today we're going to learn that when readers make an inference, they use their background knowledge and clues about a character in order to come up with something the author doesn't tell them. So again, super explicit, just letting them know this is what we're going to try today.
And when I cover the teaching point, I usually show the info chart right away, just so that as I'm saying it, they can reference what the teaching point is, but it's one sentence.
So then we get into like the teach portion. So the teach portion is maybe like 3 minutes max, 2 to 3 minutes. And during that part, I am up in front of the kids modeling with the book how I would use that strategy. I'm not at that time having a dialogue back and forth with the kids, but instead I'm showing a spot in a book that I've pre-planned. I've decided that I'm going to teach this part, this page. I'm going to show them how I would use this strategy to read or understand or problem solve a certain page. Instead of allowing the dialogue, like the back and forth, I'm verbalizing what my thought process might be in my head. So if I'm teaching them about a nonfiction book, and I'm teaching them about how when I find a tricky word, I try to use information on the rest of the page to understand it, then I've found a page already that has a word I think they're going to have trouble with, and instead of asking them, how do you think I would figure this word out? I will just verbalize my thought process. So, I'm really stuck on this word. Wonder if I can figure out what it means by looking at the rest of the page. can you look at that page with me? And then, oh, let's take a look at this picture. Maybe this is gonna help. So I'm talking the whole time, but it's only for like a minute or two, so that the kids are seeing how, if I was reading that book, I would use that strategy.
I do have to say that at least at the 5th grade level, the kids aren't used to that, and they are all raising their hand because they want to tell you what you're thinking. And so it does just take redirection. Like, remember, this is the, I do, you're going to watch. Yeah. Oh, and one other thing for the text that you're choosing, and I think this was another realization at the teaching point, it's short. And that was what kept the mini lessons in the past really long. So for my purposes, I try to grab the text from my read aloud book, and sometimes I've got it pre-planned and I've already got it chosen. Sometimes it comes from the read aloud that day that I've done earlier, and I know what I'm going to teach and I know the skill because I've chosen the book based on those skills. So I'll grab 3 or 4 sentences right from the read aloud that day, and that's the text that we're looking at.
That was the place where, like, during the Teachers College Institute, I started to think like, oh my gosh, that's way different than what I'm used to, because what I'm used to is using a mentor text and grabbing a picture book or a nonfiction book and reading it. So read, and then stop and talk. Whereas the focus for this type of mini lesson is you really just pick one page, and instead of reading the whole page, you might just pick like a word or a sentence and talk about your strategy in pertaining to that part. So it might be a book that you've read already. It might be a book that you do during your read aloud time, which is separate from the mini lesson. But that's what made my mini lessons long. And when I think about it, my kids were really engaged during the time that I was reading the story. But then if I was reading a story and then stopped to talk about a strategy, they were like checked out and done. So they were super engaged during the story part. When the strategy part came for teaching, it was a little bit more difficult because by that time I'd already been reading to them. They'd been sitting on the carpet for 10 or 15 minutes, and they were starting to get ready to read on their own.
And same thing, I think, for the upper grades. Like, I always use the read aloud as part of the mini lessons. So I'd be doing like 15 minutes of reading, and then they're trying to remember back to everything I read, and then how to connect it to the strategy that we were going to work on that day. And for me, there was just always a disconnect. So,
yeah.
Change, like if you were doing how to spell like a workbook, could you just pick something that you've read before?
Yeah, I did it. I actually did that today.
Because
So-
you're saying like retelling.
Right. So today I did a mini lesson on because I was noticing my kids were like rambling. So we talked about, I had an anchor chart that I just made. One side was how to retell fiction, and one side was how to retell nonfiction. And then I had a fiction, like a picture book that we had read like 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And then a nonfiction book that we've been reading during our writing lessons because you're writing nonfiction. So I used both of those. They'd already heard both stories. And so then we could talk about how to retell this one and how we would retell this one. But since they knew the stories already, I didn't have to read the entire book to teach this strategy.
and I've used the read aloud book for that. And the other thing is my students just finished one book in their book clubs, and many of them have started a second book. And so I'm able to reference back to the first book that they finished to tie in some of those strategies. Just because I still choose some picture books as mentor text in the upper grades, but I do rely on the read aloud for some of the strategies I'm teaching.
So connection, teaching point, teach, and then the last piece before you're done, like with the mini lesson, is active engagement, and that's again about 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. There's so many options for this, but the main part of this is if the teach is the I do, then the active engagement is we do. So kids have reading partners, or they bring a book with them to the carpet, and then if I've just modeled a strategy, then I'll have the kids try it really quickly in their own independent book, either thinking about it, marking a spot with a Post-it note, opening to a page and turning and talking with a partner about how they might apply that strategy. I'll show an example in just a minute so you can get a feel for like what this part might look like. But I think the most important part of this is the quick chance for readers to practice with partner feedback and with teacher feedback. The skill that they were just taught, or strategy that they were just taught.
So the only thing I will say with the active engagement is I've learned a lot, because in the beginning I was like, turn and talk, because that's kind of one of the things they talked about. And then I was like, okay, I'm kind of done with turning and talking. And then I did the strategy of picking partners, numbering partners so that they're taking turns. But what I found is during that active engagement, I am like walking through the carpeted area, squatting down and listening to the kids. And I always have my my lesson plan here, and I'm writing down some of the things they're saying, because that's where you're gonna bring it back at the end of active engagement. So I found that there's an accountability. And if the kids are loud talkers, you can probably just sit where you were when you were teaching. But I have found with some of my kids that don't wanna talk during active engagement or do that practice, so I can give them feedback, if I'm like walking through and listening to them, they're a little bit more, they're held accountable for their talking part of it.
And then the lesson just wraps up with a quick link. So as soon as kids have had time to practice, maybe I might go up in front and say, oh, I heard this group talking about this and this group sharing this. Today when you read, remember, restate whatever it was that your teaching point was. And then, try to get them to remember to practice this skill. This is something you can use when you read independently. Done. And then they go during independent reading time. Some of them will apply that strategy and skill directly because it's applicable to the book that they're reading, and others they won't use it that day. But like if you keep cycling it, spiraling it, and referring to the strategy, they're going to get exposure to it, and it's going to happen during the independent reading or small group time, which will be probably the most effective. Because that mini lesson again is so quick and short and focused that it's going to grab some kids, but it's not going to grab all of them. But at least you have the background and they were exposed to it, they saw you practice something, they had the chance, and now on their own, it's kind of like what can you really do, what did you really get?
And that was a big aha for both of us. One that Whitney even said, you better ask your instructor what they say about when kids should be pulled out for interventions, if they have to be pulled out. And we both were like, well, never during the mini lesson, because that's like my teaching. And that was the best time they said to pull them. Because, and I've witnessed this now in my own classroom, that there are kids that are just not going to be getting it during the 10-minute mini lesson. And that's why you conference and you do the small strategy groups. And I have about 4 kids in my class that every day after the mini lesson, they kind of wander around, they have no clue what I just taught. And I'm like, 10 minutes, can you, like, with me, 10 minutes? And I put my timer on every day, and I remind them every day, how long do I need? They're like, 10 minutes. So they know it, and they know the routine, and still, there's at least 4 a day that are still missing the concept. So then I grab them in the strategy groups, or after my lesson, I'll say, those of you that are still a little confused about what you're gonna go off and do today as a reader, stay on the carpet, I'm gonna review it again with you. And I always have kids staying back, so I'm like, all right, they still didn't get it. But now I understand why they said that's probably the least important part of your instruction is that 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. Even though I thought it was the best.
No, I do feel love
yes.
faith in myself.
Yeah, we can flip to the
I
next
have
one.
a sample of the 2nd grade mini lesson that I taught a couple weeks ago, and the lesson that I taught comes from the Strategies at Work book by Jen Saravello. And the lesson that I taught was on scanning and planning a nonfiction page, because when I was walking around during independent reading time or conferring with kids, we're working on nonfiction reading strategies right now. I started with fiction, I'm doing nonfiction. What I saw and what I observed was a lot of kids picking these books, but just like spot reading, or like flipping, looking at a picture, and not reading all the information on the page. So they're just quick. So I looked in the Reading Strategies book, and there was the mini lesson. It's called Scan and Plan. So I decided that was going to be my focus for the day. One thing that I thought was kind of neat that Teachers College showed us was the anchor chart that I'm sitting next to. They have like pre-made Post-it notes that are really nice, but I've stopped using them because they like don't stick very well. So you can buy really big Post-it notes, like 5x7 almost. And so what I've started doing is just whatever my teaching point is for the day, I'll write it on a Post-it note and maybe put a little picture that goes with it, and then stick it on an anchor chart. And so then I'll hang the anchor charts around the room, so it kind of helps kids when they're reading look at an anchor chart sometimes and remember strategies that they can use to help them, whatever the focus is, infer, problem solve, continue to read, find a good reading spot. So if I name a strategy or have a teaching point, I'll write it on a Post-it note and then stick it onto a piece of chart paper just to collect like all of the things that we've been learning.
And do they have any really helpful? Not determined. So in the upper grades, I do the same thing. I don't have the cool colored Post-it notes that Whitney has. I need to get them. I type them and just stick a piece of tape on them and stick them up. But my students then will get a copy of them, and they keep them in their reader's notebook. So they're up around the room, but I've learned a lot about anchor charts from Whitney because hers are always so pretty, and so are Amy Mellon's. Mine are not pretty, but when I type them in and put them on colored paper, then they are. But I don't know how long I'll keep them up in the room, so knowing that I'll eventually take them down, I just wanted a place for my students to keep them in their notebooks, so then every day that they've learned a new one, they just cut and glue it, and that's part of the stuff before they start their reading.
Yeah.
Another option too that we've done is taking a picture of the anchor chart and then copying it, and that's what's in their notebook rather than typing it out.
Are you ready for the video?
Okay, yep, so, and I'll probably stop it a little bit early. It was 11 minutes because I decided at the end on the last minute to have students share instead of just doing a quick link. But I'll kind of try to like share, okay, this is the connection, and then this is the teaching point.
Do you want to run?
Yeah, and
Okay.
then
Everybody stop.
this is the teaching part or something like that. Okay.
Okay, hands are quiet. Find a spot for that necklace so that's not going to distract you. And I have my timer started. I'm ready to go. I have to tell you something that happened to me yesterday when I was reading this book that I showed you yesterday in our nonfiction lesson, this Rainforest book. Okay? Something happened when I actually brought it home because I thought, oh, I didn't know I had that book in the library. I kind of want to
I did not.
read that.
You can do that with little kids.
So I brought it home. And when I was reading it on the couch, something happened to me that was kind of interesting. I kind of got overwhelmed. Like, I opened it up, and I'll show you the exact page that I opened it to. Okay? And I was like, holy cow, there's so much stuff on this page. My brain kind of got a little bit overwhelmed, and I didn't really know where to start or what to read. So can I tell you what happened? What happened was I ended up like just looking at the pictures, and then I just turned the page. Yeah. So instead of actually reading the information, I got a little bit overwhelmed by all the stuff that was on the page, and I just looked at the pictures, turned the page. Looked at the pictures, turned the page. Looked at the pictures, turned the page. Without raising your hand, can you think about if that has ever, without raising your hand, can you just think of, has that ever happened to you?
You see him?
Just think.
Okay, so that's the
So
connection.
here's what I was thinking that we could learn today. Sometimes when you read nonfiction and it's really overwhelming like this, it can be helpful to have a plan for how you're going to read the page. Okay? So the strategy today is called scan and plan. And what I want to teach you is that nonfiction readers, when they find a page that's overwhelming like that, they do two things. They scan the page and they look it all over at all the information and how it's arranged. And then they make a plan. And they go, I'm going to read this first, and then I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to read this. And then they go.
So that was the connection and the teach. And to me, it feels like it's been forever. It's been 2 minutes and 22 seconds.
So here's how we're going to act it out. Okay, we're going to do scan like this with our eyes. Can you guys do it with me?
That's a
Scan. So you take 2 fingers with your eyes. Yep, scan. Okay. And then we're going to make a plan. Are you ready? Okay, scan and plan. Okay, awesome. So this is something that nonfiction readers do. Will you help me do that with this page? Yeah. Okay, so let's think together. I'm going to go back to this page that I found
So
last
this is
night.
like the teach part now?
Okay. And this is the one where as soon as I saw it, I went, ah, there's so much information on this page. What do I do? Okay. But now I know. Now I know, instead of just getting overwhelmed and going, I'll just look at the pictures and skip it. No, now I know, in order to grow my brain and learn information, I know what I need to do. Scan and plan. Okay, so I'm going to scan with me. So this is how we're just kind of looking at the page. And maybe, you have to have your eyes up here to scan. Right? Eyes up here to scan. Maybe you're noticing a title. And maybe you're noticing there's a little information below the title. Right? What else do you guys notice on this page that maybe somebody might want to read? Ooh, I know.
So like
Here's some
asking a
facts
question, but then
in this
not
little
just
fact
talking
box.
over it sometimes gets like
Here is a fact about jaguars. Ooh, I might want to read that. Oh, look at this down here. You can put your hands down. Look right down there. There's a fact at the bottom of the page.
So this is
And
one
then
that I
over
pull
here, there's
every
like a
day
picture
for
and
group
then another
because she
fact.
doesn't
A
pay
picture
attention
and
to the
another
mini
fact.
baskets. So you should
She's right up on you.
I got a chance to scan it. Now let's make a plan. Okay, so let's think. First, I'm probably gonna wanna read the title. Okay, so I'm probably gonna start right up there. That'll be my first thing. Now second, second, I think what I'm gonna do is read like right underneath the title, just like that information right there. Okay? Third, I really want to read that fact about jaguars, so I'm going to read that next. After that, let's see, I've got like this stuff here, and I've got these facts right over here. I think after that, I'll go over here, because I kind of want to read about these animals, and then I kind of want to read this fact at the very bottom of the page, and then maybe before I turn the page, I'll read these here. Okay? So now I've scanned it, I made my plan, and now I'm ready to read and learn. Okay? I'm ready for you guys to try this. Partner one, you brought a book. Would you just put that book in your lap right now? Okay? Here's what's going to happen. Partner one, can you quickly look in your book right now and find a page with a lot of information? You can use this one. Find a page with a lot of information. When you have that page ready, okay, with your partner, I want you guys to decide, and you'll have 1 minute, decide how are you going to scan that page. So what's on that page, and what would be your plan if you were going to read it? Okay, you ready? Turn to your partner. Figure out how are you going to scan and plan and read the information on the page. Done shortly. What'd you guys find? Oh, okay, so you got a lot of stuff on this page, don't you? What else? What do you see? Title, got a little fact box, all these captions, facts, information. So what do you? How would you guys read this page? What would you do? What would you start with? Okay. This, then this, this. So you would go in order. Okay. Try another page. See what you do. Wow. Hey readers, can you take a look up here for just a moment so I can share some of the things I saw when I was walking around and chatting?
So like I chatted with one group, but then I hung out in the middle and looked at a couple other groups and what they were doing. So sometimes like to keep this really short, I'll just share I saw this, ready to go, and then link. I don't know, for whatever reason today I had kids share, and that actually they listen to each other pretty well. So I'll just show the beginning, but that's why it's longer than 10 minutes, is just because instead of sending them off right away and summarizing, I just had each little group share.
With you, because a lot of you brought different kinds of books. Could you take a look back at Landon? Landon, can you hold up that page? And can you share a little bit about what you noticed, what you and Jaden noticed from that page and how you would read it?
So he's holding it and saying like I read this, and then I go down here, and then I read this part right here.
Now, does his plan have to be the same as yours? No, but he made an idea of how he would read that page. Jackson, can you open to a page in yours and tell us? Look at how Jackson's book is different than Landon's. All eyes on Jackson. Tell us about that and how you would read it.
First, I will read the title of the chapter, and then I start with the cursive letters because that looks like the start of chapter 5. And then when I got to the end here, I study within the picture, and then I keep reading all the way down.
So he kind of has a book that has way more information and less boxes of facts. So he knows okay, when I'm getting to this page, I'm gonna read the information, I'll look at the picture, but then I've gotta keep reading right away, right? Carolyn, can you tell us a little bit about what you were gonna do, and then we'll move on? Eyes up here.
Okay, this is a great example why sometimes, like, when you share or have kids share, it doesn't always work out. So the first two, because I'd seen them in their small group, I knew, like, I worked with Landon, so I knew that he was going to share the strategy. And then I saw Jackson talking to his group, so I knew that his was going to be really beneficial. This was a wild card, and what she chose to share is the glossary in the back of the book and how she was going to read the glossary. So, all right.
Yeah. So she has like a page with that has a lot of terms on it. Okay, so she probably is going to read the name and then look at the picture and then read the definition.
Probably how
And then the names. Let's do one part. Sydney has a book today that has a lot of information on each page. Hands off, please. Sometimes nonfiction readers don't read every little thing, and that is okay. If Sydney read every single thing on this page, and then she turned the page and she read every single thing on this page, it would take her a long time to get through the book. Now, maybe one page is super interesting, and she wants to do that. But maybe there's another page where she kind of reads the introduction and decides, I kind of want to try a different one. Okay? You have to have a purpose for reading and make sure that you have a plan. Thanks, Sydney. Okay? So today, here's a new strategy we can add to our board when we read nonfiction. Okay? Today when you read nonfiction, eyes up here, it's about time for you to go back to your spots. Remember that sometimes I'm waiting for all eyes.
10 minutes.
They're done.
Yep.
All eyes. Yes. All eyes. Remember that sometimes nonfiction reading
So that was maybe right now.
because there's so much on the page.
Yeah,
But today,
I know.
are you going to give up?
No.
And don't be the kind of reader that says, I don't know what to do. I'll just look at the pictures and go to the next page. Okay? Instead, do it with me today. Be a reader that scans and plans. Okay? That's going to help you grow your brain. Definitely. Grow your brain so you're learning more knowledge. Partner one, if you have a book and you have a quiet spot, off you go. You can get started.
Okay, so that was pretty much it. And again, that was 11 minutes. I personally feel like that took forever. And when I was like in the teacher's college and they would teach us mini lessons, you had to be the kids, I kept looking at the clock and it was like, she'd stop it and say, okay, that's been 7 minutes. It's like, what? 7 minutes?
And we
Felt
were
like
sitting
it
on the
was-
floor.
Yeah.
Not on carpet.
Right,
And it
and
was
so I think about it like, this is a 7-year-old, and they have a lot of energy, and they have obviously a lot of things that can distract them, like today they had beads, because they had a baby shower for me, and they're all wearing their beads and stuff, and they're close together, and I like having readers close together, because I like teaching and having that community and having everybody close, but it doesn't always work the best for the kids, so it was just a huge eye-opener for me to shorten up that mini lesson and make it really short and mini. I mean, I can't imagine going longer than this and having them still engaged.
And I think the same in 5th grade, they do not want to sit on the carpet, but I make them for my mini lesson. Anytime I want them up and close because I want them focused for that short period of time, so they know I'm not going to ask them to sit there more than 10 minutes, so they're more willing now. In the past, they'd be like, come on, can we just stay at our desk? But I find when they're at their seats, they're more distracted. They're playing with things, they're writing notes, they're whatever they're doing. The other thing I wanted to just add that are a little bit different, at least for my experiences with the 5th grade, is during the active engagement, I notice now when I started the year with nonfiction, I gave them the text. No, sorry. When I started the year with nonfiction, they would come to the carpet with text ready to do the active engagement. When I'm teaching fiction now, I'm finding that I'm usually providing the text because we're doing more thinking about, like I said, we've been focusing on characters and theme with our books. So with our books that we're doing right now, they're not going to find it on a page in their book. And so I will try to do more of the providing it with, I give them the text, they need more of the fiction than with nonfiction. I feel with nonfiction, it lends itself better to the kids coming with some of their nonfiction materials.
So when you give them the text, you just run that page off?
It depends. So with the fiction, I a lot of times post it under the doc cam.
Sure.
And what I found is if I just put it up there and if I'm not prepared and I don't have it like pre-copied, I'll just put it under there and I'll just freeze the screen so it's up there. And then, because I know in the beginning I wouldn't always show them the text, and that was something big that they said at Teachers College, like let them see the text that you're reading. In the first couple lessons in the beginning of the year, I didn't, because I don't know, I ran out of time or I wasn't planned well enough. And I found that they weren't focused like they were when I showed them the text and they had something to look at that I was reading. And again, it's not more than a paragraph for fiction text right now.
So thinking like for that one, the scan and plan, like I had them bring their book and find a page, but one thing I could have done is I could have picked a page in my book, and then their active engagement would be, okay, I'm gonna show you a page, turn and talk to your partner about how would you read and scan the information on this page.
But it seemed like that might be more of an introduction, where now they've got their own book. It seemed like that next, like the review
Yeah.
or something, I don't know.
Right, sometimes, yeah.
And the other thing that I just thought of with the active engagement, I've been reading a lot about this lately, and a lot of the experts out there say, like, don't give them enough time to finish what you want them to start. Like, they shouldn't be, like, when Whitney did it, it was perfect. She gave them enough time to get started, and they were still talking, and she kind of cut them off. Because you've seen enough of what they're able to do. They've modeled, and there's still time to share out. So you're not giving them enough time to, like, start and finish a task. They're just starting it, just kind of getting itching for more.
I think, and then when I'm down there, like, I'm listening, okay, that one's got it, that one's got it, maybe I can have that one share, that one share. Sometimes, like, my voice is like, oh, wah, 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 wah. Like, the kid shares, sometimes there's more chances that other kids will listen. But then I'm also looking for, like, no idea what to do, not sure what to do, not sure what to do. Okay, so then my first group that I'm gonna pull as soon as they go to independent reading is you, and you in the front who's playing with the book, the beads, and all this stuff. Because I know, like, that clearly, just from observation, like, whatever I taught, that didn't work. That mini lesson, that's not the way that we learn best.
And that is one way I pull strategy groups, is I'll figure out right in that active engagement who seems clueless, who was not focused. The other way that I'll pull strategy groups, which we'll talk about in another session, is based on what they put in their workbooks, things that they're working on for me as a writer. If I see, like, and there's a couple kids right now that I thought I was very clear, and they have 100% missed the boat on characters in the book and how they're changing, and I'm like, yep, so I've got my 4 just from looking at some stop and jots that they did for me.
Yeah.
We're gonna go over time
Totally.
so should we go through this quick? I mean,
Yeah.
this week, are there questions on that? Kind of cut and dry, right?
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add to that?
I don't think so. Are there, I mean.
I
is
think
there-
the only thing on here is the share.
Mhm.
It's on my form that I filled, but it really is not part of the mini lesson necessarily. That comes at the end of Reader's Workshop, but I put it on there so that it's in my mind. Sometimes it's pre-planned, sometimes it's based on what we saw in class that day. With
Yeah.
book clubs going on right now, it's awesome. My book clubs, I'll just say, I want you to get in your book club groups, share what you focused on related to the characters and the work we're doing with your book club members. So,
Yeah.
but it's not part of the mini lesson, not always.
But yeah, I mean, we had these, and I hope you didn't like lug like 12-pound weights with all your resources, but the hope was like that at the end you could try to take a lesson from a resource that you brought and sort of plug it into this like quick mini lesson format. I think we're gonna run out of time to do that unfortunately, but I mean, I can hang for a little bit if anybody wants to.
Yeah, I can too. Just a few tips and tricks that we've learned, not only there, but also in our teaching that we had to change, is just like what you said, well, we already did this, how to build the anchor chart in front of the kids. Just writing it on the Post-it note and putting it up there is a quick way. I will try to pre-type them up, and then I just stick a piece of tape on it and I put it up there when I'm done. So just building it as you go. The other thing they did at Teachers College a lot was they'd write things on a Post-it note and then they just stick it up on the anchor chart, and then later they'd rebuild it so it looked however they wanted to do it. But in all of my classes all week, they built it right in front of us with Post-it notes, which was like an aha, because I try to make it look pretty and perfect. And then scratch out, redo, and not worth it.
Again, to keep it really short, remember that you're demonstrating during the read aloud and other portions of the day where you're doing text with kids. There's going to be so many opportunities to ask them questions, and hear their thinking, because I don't want to like throw that. That's one of my favorite times, is to hear kids, their ahas and their wonderings and their ideas. And I, at first, was really against the idea of like having a mini lesson where that's not part of it. But again, now that I reflect back, like clearly that was 10 minutes of time, and after 10 or 15 minutes, kids have a hard time listening to me, and they have a hard time listening to each other. So if I incorporate a lot of student talk, then that lengthens the time that they're sitting on the rug and they're having that lesson. So to demonstrate and keep it really short and focused, instead of asking kids for feedback or questions or what do you think, can help keep it mini.
I think we kind of covered a lot of these. Like, you can give the kids the text, thumbs up, shake your head, turn and talk, put your hand up, just so that they're actively engaged without doing the communicating or the dialogue back and forth. The pre-assigning reading partners, that was an aha, and something else I just recently read about that I now started to do is actually I pick who's partner 1 and 2 in each group, and so I know like maybe my lower readers are partners 1, and the higher ones are 2 in the group. So that when I ask them to do a skill and I know I want to focus in on a certain reader, I can say like, hey, partner 1, knowing that I'm coming around to see if they need to be a part of the group later. So just ideas. And then I think,
Yeah, I think this is just the main thing to keep in mind, to like if you're thinking about planning a lesson and keeping it really short, whether it comes from Benchmark or Strategies at Work or Reading Strategies book or whatever it is that you're using. I think the place to start is, what are you teaching? That's your teaching point. Today I want to teach you, and that's where it starts. Then you can come up with an engaging connection. You can grab a text, or you can use one of those short passages from Benchmark Literacy, and you can model it. And then the active engagement, you tried with the partner, something like that. And then the link, remember, this is what readers do, blah, 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 blah. But it really helps me to just focus on the teaching point. Like, okay, what is the lesson that I want to teach? So today it was, how do readers retell fiction and nonfiction? And then I sort of built around that. Timing lessons has been super helpful. Like, I use my phone and I have a timer that goes off at 10 minutes. And then I keep glancing at it throughout the lesson just to see, am I rambling on and on and on, which leads to videotaping your lessons. Watching yourself teach, I've like watched myself about 4 or 5 times so far this year, made notes on my language. Am I talking too much? Am I saying things like, watch me while I do this? Or am I saying something like, let's do this together, which actually invites kids to do thinking with you, as silly as it sounds. That was one aha that I had when I was watching myself teach. Are kids engaged? If they're not, why could they possibly not be engaged? What could I change? What part of the lesson were they engaged? It's only 10 minutes, so it doesn't take that long to watch, but you can really break it down to try to come up with something that's really effective the whole time. Clearly I haven't done that yet, because it's, there's still kids that are all over the place during those lessons, but it helps me just to watch myself and watch my kids.
I think the same, I time every lesson. I time them in social studies now too, just because I feel like if this is going to work in reading, I don't need to talk for 20 minutes in social studies either. And my students know, they just know what to expect. And I always tell them at the end, I'm like, that was like 10 minutes and 12 seconds. They're like, good job. And they're probably thanking me that they didn't have to sit there longer. And I think the videotaping the lessons, I know I'm doing the new ed effectiveness model, so you need to videotape to do it. It has been an eye-opener. The other thing I really like is my students watching them. Each of my book club groups has now been videotaped at least once. And then they're going to be watching that one and reflecting on how did they do in the share out, how was their active engagement in that part, just their discussions during book clubs. And so I think it's powerful for you as a teacher and for the students to watch it back.
So I think just in the interest of time, we'll wrap it up there, but hopefully, just if anything, you were able to kind of come away with a new framework for lesson planning parts of the reading workshop. Or maybe just a tip to like, what you don't have to use that framework at all, but when you do plan, how to keep it short so that the majority of the time can be spent in small groups and one-on-one conferring. And that'll be the focus of our next workshop, is that majority of the time, the 30-45 minutes after the lesson, where we're working with kids in small groups and conferring, and what happens during that time. So just in closing, just have the same exits that we had last time about an aha, maybe something that was helpful. And next workshop, if there's anything, an obstacle question about working with kids one-on-one or in small groups. And again, happy to, I feel bad we didn't get to the work part. I didn't really know how long this would go. But if you have any questions and you brought a resource and you have something like, okay, I want to do this, but I need to figure out how to make it in about 10 minutes, what would you do? Just bring it on
Yeah.
up.
And I will say we've looked extensively at benchmark literacy, and there's a lot of good material in there, and some of it just needs to be pared down. Like their mini lesson is 20 minutes, so you just have to like pick and choose the pieces that you want to cut out. But I think we've cut out things out of every resource we've used because I think they're just wordy, and you just have to figure out what you can take from them. So we can stick around and thank you.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing your Wednesday night.
Yes.
Thank you.